Peter Boghossian is an atheist. In fact, I've written about Peter Boghossian before because he wrote a book called A Manual for Creating Atheists. It's a tactics book for atheists. And in fact, I wrote a piece that you can find on our website called Tactics for Atheists. And Boghossian has done, I think, and what's the right way to put it? I want to say a really good job in this piece, equipping other atheists to be effective in attacking religious people, including Christians, to help create other atheists. Now, when I say good, I mean functionally good. I don't mean it's morally good. It's not a good idea because it's a false idea that he's winning them over to. However, he's clever. And a number of the techniques that I talk about in the tactics book are things that he's employed as well. Not because I think he stole them from me, but because I think the techniques are commonsensical for those who think about them a little bit. So I think he's just on to the same thing. And what's interesting is in his book, he doesn't say, he tells his disciples, don't argue for atheism. And he also says, don't argue against theism. Instead, ask questions about faith. That he thinks is the Achilles heel, which it is, if faith in Christianity was the way Peter Boghossian claims it is. Now, it's a straw man because he has not accurately characterized Christian faith, at least biblically speaking, though there are many Christians who have a blind faith, which is the way he understands it. But that's the Achilles heel, blind faith. And so if you just start probing and asking questions, pretty soon you're going to effectively, not his language, mine, but it's the same thing, put a stone in their shoe. Get them thinking, questioning their own convictions, and then that begins to eat away at the Christian, and there is some success he's had with his people in creating atheists from those who identify as Christians. Okay, so anyway, this guy's not on our side, not on that issue. However, he just resigned his position at Portland State University, and he's resigned it because the school has become what he has described as a social justice factory. All right? The students are not being taught to think. So let me read some of his statement because I think it's telling. Apparently the piece that he wrote for Resignation is now public, and here's some of the content of that. He writes, I never once believed, nor do I now, that the purpose of instruction was to lead my students to a particular conclusion. I'll just take that at face value, but it is a little bit hard to believe that a deeply committed atheist would not, in a certain sense, favor that theme in his classes. But nevertheless, I'll just take him at his word. Rather, he writes, I sought to create the conditions for rigorous thought to help them, his students, gain the tools to hunt and furrow for their own conclusions. This is why I became a teacher and why I love teaching. But brick by brick, the university has made this kind of intellectual exploration impossible. Isn't that interesting? The university has made this kind of intellectual exploration impossible. He continues, it has transformed a bastion of free inquiry into, there it is, a social justice factory, whose only inputs were race, gender, and victimhood, and whose only outputs were grievance and division. Wow. He continues, students at Portland State are not being taught to think. Rather, they're being trained to mimic the moral certainty of ideologues. Faculty and administrators have abdicated the university's truth-seeking mission and instead drive intolerance of divergent beliefs and opinions. Oh, isn't that interesting? This is a point I've made many times. It is the so-called tolerant folk that are the most intolerant. Tolerance is a one-way street when it comes to the left, the secular crowd. All right? He goes on to say, this has created a culture of offense where students are now afraid to speak openly and honestly. I remember giving a talk a number of years ago at Topeka, in Topeka, Kansas, and I can't remember the name of the school, university there, and I gave a public talk on the problem of evil. And one of the first people up to the microphone was a person who identified himself as a philosophy professor there at the university. Okay, we're going to do battle, so to speak. We'll cross swords with a philosophy professor. All right, what's on your mind, sir? First thing out of his mouth, I'm offended. I'm offended. Now, I have an MA in philosophy, and I promise you, in my discipline where I was trained, being offended would not count as a point against any view, because something offends you doesn't count in philosophy. And given that I was talking about the problem of evil, which is in a certain sense, a philosophic problem in the philosophic category of philosophy of religion, you would think that a philosophy professor would offer something philosophically relevant to my point. First thing out of his mouth, I'm offended. Now, he had more to say that was substantive beyond just that his feelings were hurt. But here is a grown person, an adult, who is not only that, a philosophy professor, who is leading off with his feelings are hurt. This is what Boghossian is getting at. He said this intolerance of divergent beliefs and opinions has created a culture of offense where students are now afraid to speak openly and honestly. Why can't they speak openly and honestly? Because somebody's going to get up to the microphone, a grown-up or a parent grown-up, even a professor, even a philosophy, and say, that hurt my feelings. And what's the result of hurting somebody's feelings? You get canceled. What kind of education is this? That's what Boghossian is saying. Now, there's been a response from the university, and Portland State has told Fox News, maybe that's where I got this article, I don't know, Fox News, that it is committed to academic freedom and free speech. Really? More. We respect and support the right of faculty, staff, and students to share their views on any platform they choose. Now, part of the complaint that Boghossian has made is that he didn't experience that respect. All right? And really, we respect and support the right of faculty, staff, and students to share their views on any platform they choose. I guess they respect the right to do that. What they don't respect, and this is the way it works out, is them doing that. Because if they do that, even though you have a right to do that, but we're going to punish you for exercising your right. That's the dynamic. And that's what Boghossian is complaining about, objecting to, I should say. Anyway, the school told Fox News, Portland State has always been and will continue to be a welcoming home for free speech and academic freedom. We believe that those practices are not in conflict with our core institutional values of student success, racial justice and equity, and proactive engagement with our community. Now, okay, core institutional values. Okay, one is student success, but another one is racial justice. Really? And equity. Okay, that is critical race theory language. And critical race theory is not open to free speech and academic freedom. It just isn't. That is not the way it works out. So in a certain sense, you can't say that we have an institutional value of student success and a commitment to free speech and academic freedom, but we're also committed to so-called racial justice and equity and proactive engagement with our community. How do you feel about pro-life causes? Doesn't that fall under some kind of social justice or at least equity for those unborn? No, those words are terms of art in CRT. And then they don't want to comment on Boghossian's statement of resignation, and we have a policy against that, they point out. But the article says that other educational professionals have started speaking out against what they see as inappropriate attempts to inject ideology into institutions. And Boghossian's letter alleged that he'd been the subject of harassment and false accusations after speaking out about issues with the university's promotion of critical race theory. All right? He closes with this comment, while I'm grateful for the opportunity to have taught at Portland State for over a decade, it's become clear to me that this institution is no place for people who intend to think freely and explore ideas. By the way, why would a naturalistic, atheistic philosopher at a secular university quit if they actually had a de facto, real practice of academic freedom and liberty to speak freely? It doesn't make sense. He's quitting because he's not experiencing that, regardless of what the university says to the contrary. That's my instincts on this. He says, this is not the outcome I wanted, but I feel morally obligated to make this choice. For 10 years, I have taught my students the importance of living by your principles. One of mine is to defend our system of liberal education from those who seek to destroy it. Who would I be if I didn't? Okay. Well, that's what's happening, liberal education, and that liberal in the really the best sense of the word. Not necessarily secular, but liberal in terms of liberal ideals and liberal liberties. No, you're not going to get that at the university. You're going to get indoctrination. It's everywhere. How any secular university, especially this one, being opposed by an atheist, for goodness sake, can with a straight face say we're in favor of free speech. We defend the right to free speech. Maybe in the abstract, but in practical terms, no. Doesn't happen.